What an introduction, huh? This is loud, I'm sorry. I've asked Tom Popick to stay up here with me because he was in attendance for 3 out of 4 of the hearings that we had in Maine on this, on my legislation, and he's made an effort to give me some notes so I don't wander too far afield. It's all been so interesting, I must say. Essentially, I get credit for passing the first legislation in the United States on EMP. As you can imagine from the quality of the speakers you've heard today, I didn't do it single-handedly. But I credit myself for the good sense to follow advice as I went along. A friend of mine, a scientist who I've relied on a lot for advice, put me onto this issue, and frankly, I had enough things on my plate already. I wasn't excited to hear about this. I was horrified. But on the other hand, somebody had to do it, right? And when I heard that there was a problem in Washington, that was surprising. Why not Maine? We can give it a try. So I went forward with that, and it was really quite a lot to take it on, but I was impressed with the urgency of the problem. In the first instance by Dr. Kirk, who helped open my eyes to this, and then by everything else that I read. I'm going to have a hard time following your notes, Tom. Basically, what I did when I heard about this, and this is just to give you some information in case I've lost this.
Might have clicked it off, but why don't you take this one? And I will take this one. And you can hold it, or you can put it in.
I can hold it, that's fine. Essentially what I wanted to do, because this was such a new issue to me, and I knew it was going to be to the whole legislature, basically, was to learn as much as I can. And the first advice I had from Dr. Kirk was to talk to Dr. Pry. And of course, I don't know any of these names, but I found Peter Pry, and he was wonderful, forthcoming, exciting to talk to, a man with a lot of vision and years of having worked really hard on this. And he told me then to be sure to talk to Congressman Roscoe Bartlett's office. And Bartlett's office opened up a whole extra layer of information. Well, the thing that really impressed me was how enthusiastic and forthcoming these experts with incredible experience and expertise, how willing they were to open up and share with me their gifts that they had to offer, and one right after another. In the first instance, I went to, and some of them are here in this room, obviously, Tom Popick, Cynthia Ayers, Bron Sakotis, Dr. Kirk, Peter Pry was here earlier. Bill Harris was in the background a little bit there, I guess, and Dr. Baker. But anyway, so many wonderful people and more. But the main thing was to put this thing over. So first, for me to be comfortable taking this on, I needed to learn more. So I proceeded to try to learn more from these people, and they were very generous. They sent me papers and letters to share with the legislature. Because of the urgency of it, I wanted to bring it up as soon as I could. So I tried to bring it up in 2012, and that was a very short session. And the leadership said, it's too big, we can't take it on in this short session. But I shared a lot of information with them. Peter told me I needed to come to Washington and convene a meeting with my delegation and others from the Department of Homeland Security. We did that. We met with Chris Beck from the EIS Council, and it was considered a successful meeting. After that, I was really happy to be invited to the London EIS Summit, and I went on to that, which opened just layers and layers were opening, and I came back from there much more confident that I could bring this bill successfully at least successful in informing the legislature. So what we did then was to address the whole committee process. The following year, the leadership could not block any legislation, whether they liked it or not. It had to go into the process, and it would be heard by a committee. So we had the public hearing. We had some of these great folks come to testify, and that was, I get congratulated for that. But really, the vision and the enthusiasm and the willingness to come forward of the experts and come to Maine of all places. I mean, that's really pretty far from Washington, D.C. I mean, in many ways. And Tom had to be persuaded a little harder than some, I guess, and he was just in New Hampshire. So we have to understand that these people have a lot of things to do besides chase around the country. So if you're looking in your legislatures to get something done, I think it's really important, one, to not ask someone in leadership necessarily to bring it, because it's hard for leadership to take on a big, powerful industry in a new way. It's better to get somebody who's willing to work hard for it and just do the work and go along and let them sort of be brought along without having to be a great big target of industry. So we had a fantastic public hearing. Ron Zakotis was there too. Mike Maloof, who isn't here today, was present. The Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee, I was prepared to really have this thing kind of blown off. And I think that impression was given that from the utilities, they're going to just treat it as, this is kind of another one of those Boland things. And they weren't going, because I've gone against some other tough industries too. But they tried to ignore it first. They tried to ignore it. So they didn't send anyone of consequence to the public hearing, which was terrific, because really pretty much all we had doing any testifying of any importance were the experts. And it was wonderful to, I just had to introduce the bill and then make my remarks. My remarks had to do with the vulnerability of the grid, how easy it is to take it down, how unpredictable it is, and the fact that Maine was in kind of a particularly vulnerable place in the United States. I also spoke to them about our responsibility to our citizens and not to worry too much about the arguments from industry, and also the economic benefits of having a state where there are protections, where businesses need to have reliable electrical power, and how that could be a real draw. Everybody's looking for economic development. So those are the pieces, and that it was low cost. The great thing about this, as horrible as the scenario appeared to be, there were some answers, which I had discovered from meeting these people, that could be applied, and they were existing right now. Some were just sort of design fixes that could go a long way. Others were the equipment, but we were there to bring hope as well as the vision of horror. There was also a vision of hope that was within reach. But anyway, at the end of sitting for 4.5 hours straight listening to these experts, one after another, the committee was totally bowled over. I mean, they were just transfixed. I mean, you don't see legislators sitting there with rapt attention for that extended period of time, and they did it. The interesting thing after that was that after the public hearing, the whole committee was, oh, we got to do something, and the next thing was, what, But we go from that to what we call a work session, and usually there's just one work session. In the case of this piece of legislation, there were 3 work sessions. There was so much to it. So one of the great things that I credit Tom Popick with is what he brought to the public hearing was detailed information about our state, the state of Maine, and also about New England. He brought it right smack down to ground level, home base. This is what's going on here. And it wasn't a very pretty picture, really, but he had been able to do some really good research and bring out data. And, you know, it wasn't like, good grief, we got to do something. It was, here's what you've got to work with. After that, he and Tom Kapperman together, I'd say, particularly Tom Popick, put together a list of questions to recommend to the committee that they pose to the industry. And there were questions that went right to the heart of the matter. What do you do in this situation? What can you do here? What's your modeling? What is your data on this and that and the other thing? All things that had not been shared with the committee or anybody else in the public before. And they were kind enough to supply their own answers and share it with the industry. So the committee, they had established a lot of credibility. The committee said, okay, we'll ask those questions, and they sent them out to the industry, and the industry came back to the next work session with their so-called answers. Maybe about a half to two-thirds of the questions had answers. Many of them were so feeble, it was embarrassing to sit and hear. It was, the committee was just sat, they kept waiting for the utilities, who had now discovered that they did have to send some more senior people than the lobbyists out to this fight. And they were there. But they were looking for a robust response from the utilities. And of course, they didn't get it. And as that work session went on and the questions were brought up and the answers were given, it seemed like their eyes just got wider and wider and wider. They were practically throwing up their hands by the end. They just couldn't believe how unprepared Maine was, and how little they had for a plan to protect the grid and to respond to an emergency. They started out being totally against this bill, and the position from ISO New England and our utilities, Central Maine Power, Bangor Hydro, was, don't worry, we got this all under control. We've been doing fine for years. We will continue to. We've got operational strategies that will be fine. They've always served us just great. But of course, when they had to answer these questions, that sort of reduced the potency of that argument. And then they got to a position of, well, we're neither for nor against. You can be for or against, or neither for nor against. So they started out against, moved to neither for nor against. But I credit the committee for giving the experts all the time they needed. The chair of the committee, and I credit myself for this because I'd given him so much information. He knew there was something coming. That he didn't just say, we're going to limit the testimony to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. He said, I'll let your people have all the time that they need, which was wonderful. And they took it, and they did great things with it. So the other part of it that I credit Tom and John Kapperman a lot for is they went and they visited with the PUC. They talked to the people from the utilities companies, and they worked up kind of a nice collegial kind of a environment to talk with them about. And I think that made it a little easier for them to swallow some of the things that were being exposed about what they had to do, what they had for answers. Let me see here. In the end, the bill passed the committee unanimously, but of course as amended, as we always do in the legislature. We don't leave anything alone. So, but it was okay for it to be amended because it was amended in a form that said, get all this information together, telling the PUC to do that. and look at the vulnerabilities for Maine, look at the options for protection, look at the cost, low, middle, and high cost strategies. Who's going to pay them? How's it going to work policy-wise? Watch what's going on at FERC and NERC throughout this, and come back with a report in January, and give us an opportunity then to report out permanent legislation with a plan. So that's at the point that we're at right now, and a lot of information has been given to them, and since then I know more information is being developed. What am I missing, Tom?
You could tell them the final vote.
Well, first I have to say, I have to back up one place to credit myself a little bit on this. In order for you to be mindful of that when talking with legislators that may be thinking about this in your own states. It really is important because the industry has a position of thinking they don't want to do anything about this, really. And they've been resisting it for years, many years. And they say, we're working on it. We're working at something at the federal level. We're getting to it. And just hang tight, everything's going to be fine. There's that problem to deal with. Then there's the problem of these committees of jurisdiction being used to thinking of them as the authorities, the people who know something. And now, even though it had been exposed how little they really did know and how little prepared they really were, there's still that thing built into the heads of probably most people. Well, you turn to the utilities for the answers. And so that is something that I had to work at getting past. And so I really kept up with the members of the committee between these sessions and talking about it and reminding them of what they heard. The other thing was there's an analyst who had to write up what this law was going to be that they were passing, this bill. And she's an analyst in a nonpartisan department of the legislature who has the job of just doing this sort of thing. So you do it legally, you make sure everything is according to Hoyle. But she sets it up according to what the chair said. You have to bird dog that too, because she will be getting visited by the utilities, by the PUC, by others who have an interest in skewing how that comes out. And of course, I had an interest in doing that too. So it really was important for me to make sure that it got written in the spirit that I understood the committee to have, and that required some intervention a couple of times. But in the end, it came out in a good way, in the way it needed to be, and it passed the committee unanimously. And the part that Tom likes to say is that in the full legislature, in the Senate, the vote was 32 to 3 in favor of the bill, and in the House it was unanimous. So that was terrific. And but I just wanted to just say it's just important to bird dog it all the way, because the industry is fighting you all the way. And even though at the end of these hearings and work sessions, between the work that we did and Tom and John did because they were there, and the chair of the committee, Representative Barry Hobbins, did, in working to make everybody sort of play nice together and feel nice and collegial, I think we got more out of them, out of the utilities, than was anticipated that we would. And finally, in the last act of this, the chair of the committee said, now are we all in agreement that this is a good thing to do? And he polled all the people from the utilities, as well as the experts in attendance, and of course me, and everybody very nicely said, yes, this is a good thing to do. They're probably fighting it now, but you have to just sort of keep after it. We've gotten this far, and I'm very excited about it. And I just want to thank Chuck for inviting me to the DuPont Summit last year and again this year, and the EIS Council for inviting me to London and then to Washington. Like, gee, when I went to London, everybody was sort of wondering what a state representative was doing there, and because they were big international figures. And then the next year, I was invited to be a speaker, so that was kind of a big jump. It was kind of fun. But anyway, that's where we are. I'm really pleased to have been able to be an instrument of sort of helping kick open the door for these experts to move farther. And then, having done that, we could bring it all down to the National Conference of State Legislatures in Atlanta with the help of Frank Gaffney's group, the Center for Security Policy, in August, and present it live, in person, to state legislators, because as wonderful as all these experts were, none of our media wanted to report about it in Maine. You just couldn't get them to move. These are friendly people. I think the reporters would have liked to. One was moving on it, he thought, and then he got stopped. People aren't getting the information. It's not out in the public. People don't know about it. So having done something in just a state, I could then bring it down to the NCSL and say, how about if we do a panel? Can we do that? We were able to do a panel. And in the end, it was pretty successful because we were able to get directly to state legislators who responded. And now we have a number of other states in the country who are moving forward with doing this. And shame on Congress that they had to wait for us to start pushing them. But if this is such an urgent issue, we've got to get it done one way or another. And I wanted to just ask Tom if he had he had a few remarks, and then after that I just wanted to close with a brief 4-minute video.
Sure, I'm going to be very brief, but I'm going to say that Andrea Boland is a very modest person, because not only did she have incredible legislative impact, she, as a non-technical person, has had nationwide technical impact. For those of you that were into yesterday's technical sessions, fully 3 of those presentations concerned data that Andrea, through her legislative process, had broken loose from the utilities. And so Gail, in the Imprimis presentation, talking about thousands of amps in the neutral during solar storms, that came from data that Andrea was able to get from the utilities.
Tom was able to get from
the utilities. Well, it was her process. And then when we got the presentation from ABB, that also, a lot of that had to do with refuting the data that Andrea had been able to break loose, as well as John Kappeman's presentation had to do with that data. It shows the power of what can be done at the state level. It's not just the laws at the state level, it's the technical impact that more disclosure of data can have. And so Andrea really deserves congratulations on 2 levels.
Just one little sentence before we close with this video that I think is great, that the EIS Council people put together from one of the summits. Really, it was just such a pleasure to work with these people, and they are prepared to help so many others. If you just will listen to what they have to say and try to follow their advice, they just mean to be so kind and helpful throughout the country. I know Frank Gaffney is working hard to coordinate a lot of this activity. So just remember that. And one joyful thing about this video that I'm about to show you is it came during, we opened our panel at the NCSL conference to legislators with it. And we came right after the industry had been up there strong on their panel saying how there's not a problem, we're doing fine, we've got operational procedures. What that started, picking up the phone and calling someone. Well, guess what? The phone might not be there. But that's what operational procedures were about. But they had just been up there trashing the whole idea of doing anything about this. And then we were able to open with this video and then go on to do more explanation to the legislators. So I hope you enjoy seeing it, and thank you very much for your attention.
While it's loading, I'm just going to mention a few things. On this book in the back that talked about our presentation, on page 74, you'll see Andrea Boland's question from the audience on one of the transcripts. And since that year, a lot has happened. And it looks like we're about ready to begin, so I'll be quiet as soon as that hits, unless it needs more time. I think it's ready to go.
We are only one act of madness away from a social cataclysm unlike anything our country has ever known.
EMP is one of a small number of threats that could hold at risk the continued existence of U.S. civil society.
You want to think of that as a hurricane in space.
Just one violent active region on the sun can cause essentially continent-wide, perhaps even planetary scale impacts to our critical infrastructure.
As Dr. Lubchenco said earlier, it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when.
The likelihood of a severe geomagnetic event capable of crippling our electric grid is 100%.
We would be facing a public safety, a public health environment, a requirement to provide support to our citizens that would be unprecedented.
There will be no supply of drinking water, no food, no gasoline, no transportation, no communication, no medical care.
Emergency services, government services, banking, finance.
I want to say it very clearly and right up front. A solar magnetic disturbance, electromagnetic pulse effect on our grids is inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And as I see it, and from the study and research we've conducted, civilization is entirely unprepared for this eventuality.
Governments and corporations are used to dealing with crises by experiencing them and gradually learning how to respond. EMP and severe space weather are in a different category. We're talking about a black swan event which is not effectively survivable.
What we've got to do is to bring to the attention of the world what is potentially the greatest catastrophe to have hit the world for centuries.
We're finally starting to get beyond that, where we're no longer admiring the problem. People, leaders, are starting to move forward and take action to fix it.
For this kind of a problem, you have to invest in resilience. You have to take preemptive action. And you cannot retroactively invest in resilience once you see how bad the problem is. We've made a good start. We have an adequate understanding of the problem now to go forward, and initial steps are being taken by government, by industry. We know what has to be done. The question now is, how much time do we have? Will we get what we have to do done in time?
Thank you. And now a round of applause again for Andrea and Tom and crew. Now, we're going to take 15, we have 15 minutes. We can go maybe another 10 beyond it. Wanted to make certain first, did anybody have any questions of Andrea, for example, about the process or other questions? If you do, please, yes, hold on 1 second. I'm going to bring the mic to you and identify yourself, please.
I'm Bill Harris. So I have a question for Andrea about the prospects for state legislation, because the FERC process requires that federal standards go through NERC, so they basically can block it. So I know you had an adverse vote like a day or so ago. What are the prospects for June 2014? What do you think the states can do at the state level or cooperatively through this national conference?
Well, what Bill Harris is referring to is this conference that I was at a couple of days ago, asking for the National Conference of State Legislatures to support a resolution asking the federal government to support states that take initiatives like this and want to work on it, and at least to not get in their way. And we haven't had anybody getting in our way anyhow. There's an office within FERC whose mission is dedicated to supporting state critical infrastructure. So I had a resounding defeat, I have to tell you, on 2 resolutions that I brought, and I think it's too bad, but it's hard for people to take in. There was a lot of information there. It's a little bit shocking. They weren't ready to put it into a policy. On the other hand, after they turned down those 2 resolutions, there was a 3rd thing, which was an amendment to the policy, to the energy policy, that had basically the same elements to it, and they all voted for it. So maybe there's hope that, you know, as information continues to be dumped on them, they start to grow. But the good thing about this opportunity is that it was an opportunity to share information. And the more information we share, the farther we get. But essentially, the NCSL only has sort of a moral effect on the Congress to go and say, all these states think you should do such and such. They may or may not go along with that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, hold on 1 second. Identify yourself, please.
Dr. Martin Duziak in Virginia. And my question is simply, how can resources, including anybody in this room, join with people in the Commonwealth of Virginia who are trying to effect both legislative and civilian change for this? Here I am.
Okay, do we have somebody left from Virginia? But shy of Virginia, you may have a thought from Maine as to how Virginia might think of it. Yes.
Well, I think there are a number of people in the room that are participating in outreach to other states. And as I mentioned before, Frank Gaffney, the Center for Policy Security or Energy Security, was here, and he just left. He's one person, but anybody can contact me, that's for sure, and probably others whose cards you have picked up would be helpful in helping you network. But I personally don't have any contacts at this time.
We have someone from the state of Virginia here who will identify himself and make a comment.
Hi, it's Hank Cooper, and I live in Virginia and also in South Carolina. And Bob Newman, who spoke to us earlier, of course, lives in Virginia, and he's a former adjutant general. And I believe that the effort which we are jointly beginning to pursue with the National Guard will have spillover context that will get to state legislatures in both Virginia, South Carolina, and their in-between states as well.
Okay, and I have a comment from Mary, who is from Maryland.
Yes, you know, the national capital area is really important because that's where the government is. And if we do it in Virginia, that's great. If we do it in North Carolina, that's great, or South Carolina. But it would be nice to do it also in Maryland so that we've got the national capital area kind of covered with this. So if we could do it as a joint kind of adventure to go forth with this, I think that it would be really valuable. And any help that you can give us, Andrea, that would be great.
Well, anybody can feel free to phone me, but there are a lot of other people, too, who can be helpful, as Ambassador Cooper pointed out, and some of the folks you've heard here. But anybody can feel free to call me. And I know you can catch these other folks, too.
One of the things I wanted to mention as we do this is that there are different groups who are in this room. You know, some groups are organized to encourage specific actions because they're either lobbying organization or they're allowed to do that. Others are trade associations, other are standards organizations. InfraGard happens to be a very neutral information sharing organization. And one of the things we're doing here is welcoming all of you to join InfraGard because it's free. You don't join as a company or an association, you join as an individual. And it's free. You just get a background check from the FBI, so it takes a little while. But then you're free to join these working groups that we are organizing nationwide in every one of these technologies and industries and policy arenas. And many of the leaders you saw here today are involved in those. And so when you talk to many of them, one moment they might have the InfraGard hat on as an information sharing collaboration of these individuals. Another moment they may have a business hat on. And another moment they may have a legislator's hat on. And they're all different hats, and we usually wear more. We usually have more than one hat in the closet, right? So you're very much welcome to participate. And I like these questions because one of the things I'd like to do in these last few minutes is continue more dialogue and interaction from those of you here about ways you might want to do things in Virginia or wherever you are across the country. And by the way, we're still being webcast, so this is a public discussion, and we have people from around the country who are listening to us now or watching us. And as it gets posted on YouTube and other places, you will be able to take what you saw today and share it with your colleagues and friends and enlist their participation because we need information and ideas from them. And so it's a true back and forth collaborative information effort. And I see another hand here, so identify yourself. Yeah.
Terry Hill with the Passive House Institute. I don't know who could answer this question, but if you had a clean slate, given what you know now about all the dangers that we're facing, how would you design the grid now with a clean slate?
So he's looking at me, so I guess I get to answer that first, but he was foolish enough to look at me when he said that. Actually, we bring a lot of people to the table who answer that question. And when we bring people from around the world, very often we look at people like from Europe who might say, don't build huge regional grids, build municipal grids. When you do things like create power, whether it's coal or anything else, and you have waste heat, capture that waste heat and sell the steam so that the energy that you create locally will make you more money, and you can do it more cost effectively at a local level and be that much more resilient. But we all like the idea of centralized systems, and we heard today about microgrids. And so the idea is to get as many people as we can from as many points of view, all getting empowered to do power. That would be my way, is to bring a lot more folks in. And Andrea, maybe you want to say something about that.
Well, I just wanted to share what I've heard from others. I'm looking at Ron Sakotas, and I know he always says this too, that you need to have a plan, and you need to identify what the most critical assets are that you want to protect, whether it would be, say, a hospital or a government building or a police station, a school. You might not be able to do everything. And the other thing that was emphasized also is to protect these great big transformers was a focus, because they're so hard to replace. It takes up to 2 years to replace them in good times. And if we've had a power outage, everybody's going to be in the market for them. So the line's going to be longer, even if they can get there. So those are the big ones that I understand. Maybe someone else.
George has a hand up, so give it to me before I make another comment and switch the questioning around.
The other thing I would add is we would need to protect the data, the control centers, and we need to install more sensors so we're not flying blind. We don't know. Right now we don't have the sensors we need to detect the state of the grid in the presence of these threats. So that would be important.
As we had, many of you know, we've done an economic impact assessment to bound the size of this problem, and one of the outcomes of that is we showed that at least in the mid-impact scenarios, by protecting roughly 10% of the most critical infrastructure, you can avoid up to 60% of the economic losses.